Max Boot is one of the worst people in the Washington media and has been for many, many years. He's like David Frum or Bill Kristol or people of that kind, just an absolute fanatical, sociopathic, bloodthirsty neocon who has cheered every single war that the United States has not only fought but proposed to fight. He constantly is holding himself as this powerful, strong figure, talking about strength all the time. He's never gotten anywhere near combat or fighting in combat. He loves to send Americans and their families and other people's kids and people and their families in other countries to go fight and die in the wars that he then runs to a column and speaks in this Churchillian way about the glory of the conflict so that he can feel righteous and powerful to compensate for his internal weakness. Just one of those kind of neocons, very, very standard. But what he also is somebody, like most neocons, who the minute you question their wars and say, wait a minute, why are we going to this war? Why should we go to war in this country? Will accuse you of being an agent of that foreign country. It's not that you disagree about whether the U.S. should fight the war. It's that you must be a sympathizer of Osama bin Laden or Saddam Hussein or Muammar Gaddafi or Bashar al-Assad or Vladimir Putin. And the reason why Max Boot went from being a hardcore Republican in the Bush years to now being an overt Democrat and a hater of Donald Trump is because he spent so many years insisting and writing that he had no question that Donald Trump was a secret agent, a spy or agent of the Russian government, even being paid or blackmailed to do it. Obviously, there was no evidence for that. Robert Mueller, after 18 months, barely alluded to that theory, let alone affirmed it. But that's his tactic. He's called me a Russian agent before, or working for the Russian government, Tucker Carlson, many other people. That's what he does all the time. As it turns out, he does know someone very well who was an actual secret agent and spy for a foreign government. It's his wife, who just got indicted by the U.S. Justice Department in a very detailed affidavit for secretly working as an agent of the South Korean government, helping South Korean spies infiltrate the United States government, and using her access to U.S. media to disseminate South Korean propaganda for pay that she never disclosed. Here from the New York Times on Monday, quote, the U.S. accuses a former CIA analyst of working for South Korea. Obviously, Matt Boot's wife is a former CIA analyst. Quote, Sumi Terry, a North Korea expert with the Council on Foreign Affairs, was charged with acting as an agent for Seoul after leaving the intelligence agency. Sumi Terry, a prominent voice on American foreign policy, had a refined palate, a love for top-shelf sushi, and a taste for designer labels. She likes coats by Christian Dior, handbags by Bottega Veneta and Louis Vuitton, and Michelin-starred restaurants. And according to federal prosecutors in Manhattan, she accepted such luxury goods and other gifts in exchange for serving the South Korean government in Seoul. Ms. Terry, a former CIA analyst and a senior fellow for Korea Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations, is accused in a 31-page indictment, remember, by the Biden Justice Department, released Tuesday, of a years-long effort to assist South Korean spies. The indictment says she even introduced the spies to congressional staff members, and an action that she described as, quote, bringing the wolf in. She was bringing the wolf into the most sensitive areas of the U.S. government, and she married Max Boot, who has a lot of access in Washington. Quote, in Ms. Terry's case, prosecutors said she began operating as a foreign agent in 2013, 5 years after leaving the CIA. She was first contacted by an intelligence officer posting as a diplomat for the Korean mission to the UN in New York City, the indictment said. In return for her work over the next decade, Ms. Terry received handbags, clothing, and at least $37,000 in covert payments to the think tank where she was employed at the time. According to the indictment, federal agents had suspicions regarding Ms. Terry's contact with Seoul as recently as November 2014, when the FBI called her in for a voluntary interview. Over the ensuing years, agents would track Ms. Terry to numerous restaurants and luxury stores in Washington, providing photos of her dining with her handlers and standing next to them at cash registers as they bought her expensive goods. Several were included in court papers Tuesday. Ms. Terry's activities on behalf of South Korea started small and became more ambitious as she worked with 3 different handlers, the indictment said. At first, she mainly published opinion articles favorable to South Korea's stance on North Korea, but soon she was facilitating meetings between incoming Trump administration officials and South Korea intelligence agents in 2016. By 2018, Ms. Terry was hosting meetings at a think tank at the request of her South Korean handlers, giving them access to U.S. national security officials, the indictment said. This is so ironic, isn't it? That Max Boot has spent 20 years intensively and incessantly accusing people of being secret agents, undisclosed secret agents for foreign governments when they disagree with them, and all along, the woman next to whom he was sleeping and to whom he's married was herself actually what he accused everybody else of being. And it's not just that it's his wife. It's somebody who he helped get into the Washington Post, where he's a columnist, someone with whom he co-wrote Washington Post articles and co-wrote Washington Post articles not only about the government she was serving and getting payments from criminally, according to the DOJ, but he co-wrote articles with her that did nothing but push the propaganda of the South Korean government, including in articles that the indictment explicitly cited as ones where she called up her handlers and said, I need to get instructions on what we're supposed to say in this article. One of those is this article in the Washington Post. It's co-bylined by Max Boot and Sumi Terry. And the headline is, the nascent trilateral relationship is the best possible answer to China, referring to a alliance between the United States, Japan, and South Korea, bolstering this alliance that obviously is in South Korea's interest. Cooperation grows regarding economic security, intelligence, sharing, and military readiness. And it goes on to argue that not only is it vital that the United States continue to arm and ally with South Korea, but warning that Donald Trump is a danger to the alliance because he sees South Korea as just this waste of money where we pour billions of dollars into it in exchange for nothing. And so she's trying to defeat Donald Trump on behalf of South Korea. Now, after this indictment came out, the Washington Post has continued to promote Max Boot's articles as though nothing had happened. And I and others raised our voices and said, how can you just ignore this, Washington Post? You have articles in your paper that, according to the DOJ, were basically written by the South Korean intelligence agents and given to Sumi Terry, the co-author, in exchange for pay. And you presented it as though it was a legitimate, valid expression of opinion. And so finally, in response to all this pressure, they finally put an editor's note on top of not just this article, but every other one that she wrote, including she co-wrote with Max Boot, that says the following, quote, editor's note, July 18, 2024. On July 16th, a federal indictment was made public alleging that Sumi Terry had acted as an unregistered agent of the South Korean government beginning in 2013. If true, this is information that would have been pertinent for the Post publication decision. Oh, do you think? Ms. Terry has denied these charges and has asserted through counsel that the allegations in the indictment are unfounded. But here's the kind of thing they were writing, Max Boot and his ex-CIA wife, who's now accused of being a criminal spy for the government of South Korea. This was just a couple months ago, May 27, 2024. Quote, a pro-American trilateral alignment is the best possible answer to the menace posed by the anti-American trilateral alignment of China, Russia, and North Korea. But because the Japanese-South Korean-U.S. relationship is so recent, it might be imperiled by changes of leadership in those countries. Although it has little to do with the trilateral relationship, Biden, Yoon, and Kishida are all unpopular, meaning the 3 leaders of the United States, Japan, and South Korea. A Trump return to the White House, they argued, on behalf of the South Korean government in the Washington Post, would be a serious setback for the United States systems of alliances, and the trilateral relationship is no exception. This is the kind of foreign interference in our government, in our elections, that people like Max Boot and everyone else, including the Washington Post, has been warning of when it came to Donald Trump, even though it ended up being false. This article, that according to the DOJ was actually just a disguised propaganda article by the South Korean government to manipulate our elections, goes on, quote, Trump is obsessed with the cost of defending South Korea without considering all of the benefits. Can we put this next thing up? Trump is obsessed with the cost of defending South Korea without considering all of the benefits that accrue from a close relationship with the world's 13th largest economy and a stalwart liberal democracy. As President Trump demanded that South Korea increase its subsidies for the U.S. troop presence to more than $1 billion a year, but he still isn't satisfied. Just to be clear, Trump's point of view is that South Korea is a booming, thriving economy, and their citizens have a higher standard of living than millions of Americans. And so Trump's argument is, why are we paying to protect you when you're not contributing economically at all and we're paying for everything? And he forced them to increase the amount of subsidies like he's trying to do with NATO. And Max Boot and his spy wife, his ex-CIA wife, who's accused of being a spy by the DOJ on behalf of South Korea, is here to say that Trump is evil for even pressuring the South Korean government to do anything. Quote, sounding a refrain he has echoed consistently since at least 1990, Trump told Time magazine in April, quote, I want South Korea to treat us properly. They've become a very wealthy country. We've essentially paid for much of their military free of charge. Trump previously suspended joint U.S.-South Korea military exercises. In the future, he is unlikely to fund trilateral exercises. Little wonder that during a recent trip to both Japan and South Korea, we found considerable anxiety in both countries about the prospect of another Trump term. The Biden administration is now in the midst of talks with South Korea on a new cost-sharing agreement for U.S. forces in the hope of reaching a deal before Trump can return to office. All three leaders would do well to act urgently right now to lock in the trilateral process. I mean, this is nothing more than an article demanding that the United States give as much money to South Korea and to pay for all of their defense and not ask them to do anything more by a spy for the South Korean government, according to the DOJ, who's partnering with her husband, Max Boot, to be able to launder those South Korean government talking points in the Washington Post. Even though her husband is somebody who goes around incessantly accusing anyone who raises doubts or questions about his views of being a spy or an agent for Russia or whatever. It's not just in the Washington Post where she wrote. She also wrote in the New York Times this article from 2014, Let North Korea Collapse, where she said, so far the United States, South Korea, Japan, and China, the main countries of the stake on the Korean Peninsula, have responded by adopting a policy of soft containment. Even as they have tried to curb North Korea's excesses, they have allowed the regime to stay in place. They fear that its demise would be too destabilizing and that the peninsula's reunification would mean crippling economic and social costs for South Korea. But this is a blinkered view because the long-term benefits of North Korea's collapse, both strategic and economic, far outweigh short-term costs. So she's essentially arguing here that the U.S. engaged in regime change against the government of North Korea, a government with a vast stockpile of dangerous nuclear weapons, in order to benefit South Korea. Now, one of the really fascinating parts of this story, because I'm sure the New York Times and the Washington Post are going to say we had no idea, is that there is this satirical account on Twitter that's been around for quite a while under the name Richard M. Nixon. It's at Dick Nixon, and sort of gives voice to or tries to channel Nixon's thought process. And yet in 2014, June 16, 2014, more than 10 years ago, this account directed this tweet to Sue Terry, Max Boot's wife, now accused of being a spy. And he said the following, quote, how much did the South Korean intelligence service pay you to write that trash in the Times? The trash saying, oh, we should let the North Korean government collapse, we should help it fall, and then reunify it all under South Korea. How did this account know that she was getting paid by South Korean intelligence to publish insane pro-South Korea propaganda in the New York Times, and yet the New York Times, the Washington Post didn't know. This is from 2014, that tweet. Just to underscore this story, here from the Washington Post, Max Boot, and I could show you articles like this all night, January 13, 2019. Here are 18 reasons Trump could be a Russian asset. Imagine you're married to an asset of a foreign government. And then you go around accusing other people of that with no evidence while you're next to and co-authoring with a woman who actually is your wife. He says, quote, "This is hardly a beyond a reasonable doubt case that Trump is a Russian agent. Certainly not in the way that Robert Hansen or Aldrich Ames were, but it is a strong circumstantial case that Trump is, as former acting CIA Director Michael Morrell and former CIA Director Michael Hayden warned during the 2016 campaign, quote, an unwitting agent of the Russian Federation or a useful tool who is manipulated by Moscow. If Trump isn't actually a Russian agent, he is doing a pretty good imitation of one." I mean, who would know better than Max Boot? And then here he is on CNN doing the same thing. There you see the caption on CNN, 18 reasons why Trump may be a Russian agent. Financial ties to Russia, election hack to favor Trump. All the Russia, if you're listening, 101 contacts, Carter Page, Paul Manafort, Rogers, all the crap. The conspiracy theories, the falsified conspiracy theories that dominated our discourse for years, drowned our politics in it. A CIA, FBI, false conspiracy theory laundered through the Washington Post and the New York Times. They gave themselves Pulitzers for it, designed to destroy the Trump presidency. And here was Max Boot on CNN accusing Trump of likely being a Russian agent, while his wife was actually that for South Korea the entire time. I mean, like I said, the universe is rarely this just. You rarely see karmic justice so satisfying, so perfect. I mean, imagine someone telling you 3 years ago that it's going to turn out that Max Boot's own wife is a criminally concealed agent of a foreign power while his whole career is based on accusing others of that. And that he co-wrote op-eds with her. He brought her into the Washington Post to put his own name on these articles that the GOP says were part of the criminal scheme. How can Max Boot just say at the Washington Post? I mean, I get that these are accusations, but certainly some response to this. There's a huge journalistic scandal on the part of the Washington Post and on the part of Max Boot, and it's also a deeply, deeply satisfying one. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.